session of the day. It will be my pleasure to carry you over this event through the lunch. We are starting just now session 8 about limits of knowledge, which is something I can really relate to, as my knowledge of knowledge is definitely limited. We'll have 3 talks. First one by Peter Howell about theoretical framework of Ludic knowledge, and this one will start right now.
Hello. Yes, so this talk is presenting a theoretical framework of Ludic knowledge. So in this particular context, that is Ludic knowledge that applies to the kind of process of engaging directly with playing games. And talking about that specifically through a case study of disruptive game design and player cognitive engagement. And I'll talk about what I mean by those two things momentarily, so they will make sense, I promise. So specifically, I'm mainly going to focus on the middle of these 3 sort of phases of player-game interaction. So how knowledge is used by players during kind of active gameplay, and how it's used to interpret game content and to overcome in-game challenges in the game as played. And then I'll briefly talk about how that knowledge feeds through to how players talk about their game experiences after they've played, and how they reflect on them with other players in the game as reported, and kind of briefly also look at how knowledge is constructed before players play games, and how expectations are constructed, and how those expectations influence both the kind of the gameplay process and how players talk about games afterwards. So this is all in the context. This whole kind of research project was carried out alongside the design and development of Amnesia and Machine for Pigs. So I was working as a game designer at the Chinese Room and a researcher at University of Portsmouth's Advanced Games Research Group, and carrying out kind of both of those things at the same time, because I am a glutton for punishment. And all of the data that informs this theoretical framework is taken from our experiences in the design and kind of playtesting process, and also from a qualitative player study that was carried out after the game was released. So we took kind of 5 months of online player discussion data, looking at how players were talking about their game experiences, and how that fed through to these different types of knowledge that I'm going to talk about. So I'm coming at this from very much a research through design perspective, so you'll have to forgive me if my kind of deeper philosophical knowledge is somewhat lacking, but this is about limits of knowledge, and that is fine. So, very simply then, the framework splits Ludic knowledge into these 4 main kind of knowledge categories. So, intra-Ludic knowledge, which is knowledge constructed in the process of playing one particular game, and is therefore specifically relevant just to that one specific game. Interludic knowledge, knowledge that applies either between specific games or perhaps in the context of a small subset of games, like a series or a franchise. So in the context of Machine for Pigs, that might be knowledge that applies both to Machine for Pigs and also to the first Amnesia game, Amnesia the Dark Descent. Transludic knowledge, similar idea, but in this case, knowledge that applies across a much broader range of games, and perhaps games that aren't otherwise obviously directly connected to each other. So that might be, for example, things like knowledge related to the standard kind of console-based first-person shooter control scheme. Once we've learned how that control scheme works in a console-based first-person shooter, we can transludically apply that knowledge to other similar games. We don't have to relearn that control scheme every time. And extra-ludic knowledge, anything that the player has constructed outside of that immediate context of games and gameplay, so anything from their day-to-day life experiences. So that knowledge might be brought with them to the process of playing games, and it might be used to aid in that process. So if a player is playing a driving simulator, for example, and they have knowledge of driving in real life, then that real-life extra-ludic knowledge might help them be a better, or perhaps worse, depending on how good a driver you are, driver in the driving simulator. So each of these different types of Ludic knowledge has a different degree of contextual relevance to the one specific game that we're talking about. In this case, Machine for Pigs, but that could be whatever game you happen to be focusing on. And through the kind of the lens of encoding specificity theory, cognitive psychology suggests that when we encode information into memory, the first time that we encounter it in the world, that it's encoded along with these various different contextual cues and bits of contextual information about the environment in which that knowledge was acquired. So if we learn something in a particular room and we're in that room again later, it's easier to recall that knowledge. And it also means that there's more chance for that knowledge to be triggered into conscious thought because the kind of contextual information matches the encoding environment in which that knowledge was acquired. So applying that to ludic knowledge specifically, when players are playing a particular game and they're faced with a situation that they need to kind of overcome using what they've learned previously, or perhaps interpret something using knowledge that they've acquired previously, the most likely place that they're going to find that initially is that intraludic knowledge. And only if they can't find anything that is intraludically relevant will they refer outwards to these other less immediately contextually relevant knowledge types. Now, there's plenty of scope for there to be kind of edge cases to that, but generally that kind of applies quite nicely. And so many kind of typical game challenges, especially in action-focused games, tend to challenge a player's ability to perform the skills that the game has trained them to respond to particular situations with. And to make sure that that is the kind of focus, the intraludic knowledge construction is very much supported by the design of the game. So I've loosely termed this kind of incremental accretive learning. You could call it numerous other things probably, but kind of starting with this initial base of maybe a few core game mechanics or a small section of game world to explore, and then gradually building on top of that with new content, new mechanics that all build on that initial basis, but never challenges the reliability of that starting set of knowledge. And it is a very manageable kind of cognitive process for players. So with disruptive game design, what I wanted to do was see what would happen if we subverted or indeed disrupted that kind of learning process and introduced instability into game mechanics and some of the game kind of content, and challenged that intraludic knowledge reliability, and either force players into a situation where they were reconstructing large chunks of intraludic knowledge from the ground up at multiple points during the game rather than just at the beginning, or putting them into situations where they were more likely to need to refer to those less immediately contextually relevant knowledge types. And either way, increasing the cognitive engagement that players were having to kind of exert in order to make meaningful progress in the game. So switching that focus from performing the learned skills to analysing which skills need to be applied in which particular circumstance. So I've got a couple of quick examples from Machine for Pigs. Apologies, minor spoilers. Specifically, there was one person downloading it over there, I saw earlier. Thank you. So following this kind of straightforward disruption process, so introducing the initial mechanic or component of the game content in some way, and allowing the player time to construct what they think is reliable knowledge about that thing, and indeed then reinforcing that initial learning for a short period of time during the game. So we're allowing the player to feel like they're making some kind of progress and that they feel like they're making some kind of inroads into learning how this game works before we then disrupt that in some way and force them to relearn knowledge, rather than just presenting them with a bunch of broken rules from the outset, because that's just confusing and probably quite frustrating. So the first example then, breaking the internal consistency of the game environments and their structural rules. About halfway through the game, we've got two levels back to back where the game environments shift and change as the player moves through them. So corridors disappear after you've moved through them and moved to other places. Walls disappear and turn into doors. Doors disappear, become walls. And the whole environment kind of manipulates itself as the player moves through. Up to that point in the game, so the first sort of hour to hour and a half of gameplay, the environments haven't done this. They've been very stable. They've simply been, a container for the game activity to take place in. And again, after that disruption, the remainder of the game goes back to being very stable and very reliable. But what we found in looking at the player discussion data was that the effect of this quite short-term disruption was quite a significant change in how players then approached that second half of the game. And we have players talking about how they changed from kind of being quite blasé about how they were moving through the environment in the first half of the game, and being a lot more considered and a lot more cautious in that second half, because they were expecting the environment to change in these different ways, and they didn't want to be cornered by one of our lovely man-pig enemies, because the environment has changed around them, even though it wouldn't do that again. So in the second example, we've got one of the game's core mechanics is this being a first-person horror adventure. You have a lantern that you carry around with you because that is the law. That's how first-person horror works nowadays. And in the first sort of third of the game, we've got that lantern acting as quite a simplistic and very simple to understand kind of warning mechanism. So as enemies get closer to the player, the lantern will flicker more and more intensely to show that there's enemies close by. It's a very simple proximity warning system. In the second kind of third of the game, we change the rules of how that works very subtly. So rather than it being proximity-based, it shifts to being a directional system. So if an enemy is within a view cone coming out from the front of the player, then it will trigger that warning system, regardless of distance. And then again, in the third of the game, we introduce a new enemy type that basically makes the lantern flicker completely randomly and continuously all the time that the enemy is in the environment. So rather than that final section of the game being this kind of ultimate test of the player's learned knowledge and learned skills, and a test of how well they can perform those skills, we basically completely break the only sort of mechanic that players have had up to that point in order to detect and kind of strategically avoid the enemy agents in the game, forcing them to play in a completely different way in the last sort of 3 to 4 levels of the game. And players were very, very positive about this. Lots of players particularly citing the fact that they enjoyed being pushed out of their comfort zone. They enjoyed having to change how they were playing, and enjoyed the fact that the knowledge that they'd established up to that point was unreliable. With a few players specifically talking, kind of referring to their interludic knowledge of the previous Amnesia game, and the warning system in that, which was one of the very, very few things about the Dark Descent that kind of was criticised. The warning system in that is audio-based, so when enemies are hunting for the player, a very obvious music track is playing, and when it's safe for players to emerge from usually their cupboard, then the music track fades out. And it was an extremely reliable system that was never really challenged at any point during the game, so players were essentially responding to a very obvious in-game stimulus with a very learned response, either hide or don't hide. And with the lantern system, players were saying that they enjoyed the fact that it was an understandable and reliable enough system that they knew what they were supposed to be doing vaguely in response to that flickering, but that it was never 100% reliable, and it kept them more engaged in the process of how they were thinking about the information that the game was giving them, rather than just responding to a situation. Okay, so there's a couple of examples of kind of in-game disruption. Another thing that I wanted to try with Machine for Pigs was what would happen if we simply just present a bunch of ambiguous information to the player from the outset. And kind of Dan was talking about this a little bit yesterday. And I didn't quite have the guts to do this with a specific kind of core mechanic. I don't think that would have gone well, especially when there was money attached to it. So instead we did this with kind of less important story mechanics, story components. So the lovely pig mask here is a very simple static 3D object that we drop into the game at various different points. Some more hidden than others, as you can see. And there is nothing in the game that explicitly says what this thing is, how it should be interpreted, whether it has any gameplay functionality. It's entirely left up to player interpretation. And so in terms of that disruption process, what I was interested in here was, rather than setting up an initial kind of basis of interludic knowledge to disrupt, instead just disrupting that initial encoding process at the start and preventing players constructing reliable interludic knowledge at all. And what we found with this particular example, but some of the other kind of components had similar types of responses, but this was probably the most obvious one, was that players became so fixated on trying to establish kind of personally meaningful closure on what this thing was, that their kind of ongoing cognitive engagement after they played was kind of continued at a very deep kind of interpretive level. Again, I've kind of loosely termed this extrinsic reflective cognitive engagement, but again, you could probably call it something else. But the amount of players that were kind of giving us massive discussion threads on the forum, entire interpretation pages on the community wiki, doing enormous amounts of research into the lore and the backstory of the game and the Aztec mythology that informed it. Really quite impressive amounts of research. Just to kind of continue that degree of engagement. And obviously from a developer's point of view, it's a very simple way of keeping a kind of adding value to the game experience and also ensuring that you've got an active community as well. So, yes, I've kind of loosely talked about the game was recorded and the game was played there. Just to finish then, a couple of aspects of the game as expected and how that construction of expectation affects these other two things. So, expectations are obviously very individual to the player, and they're a construction of the individual player's interludic and transludic and extraludic knowledge, depending on what personal experiences of life and kind of other games that they've played they have. But the way that this kind of affects the game was reported in the case of Machine for Pigs is particularly interesting. So I won't go through all of these examples because I'm going to run out of time otherwise, but there's kind of more detail in the paper. But one of the kind of main things that we wanted to do with the game's kind of pre-release media, so the trailers that we put out, was to not spoil any of the actual kind of content of the game. It's not a massively long game, and so anything in the trailers that kind of spoiled aspects of that main game experience was kind of quite a big deal. So the two trailers that we put out, we specifically made kind of bespoke game events that were never going to be in the main game to give a feel for what the game experience was going to be without spoiling that final experience for the players. And we thought this was a lovely thing to do, this was nice, this was a beautiful thing that would not upset players. No, they were not happy. Very angry, indeed, as Dan said. Extremely angry subset of players that went to the extent of, because their kind of expectation alignment had been kind of broken between what they'd been told they were going to get in the game and what they actually got in the reality of play was different. Players went so far as to kind of accusing us of false marketing and bait and switch tactics, and it all got very ugly very quickly, and we all kind of disappeared from the forum for a few days. Coupled with the fact that players were applying their transludic knowledge of game genre, caused a particular problem as well. So the game was marketed, possibly through kind of miscommunication on our part, also through the limitations of the distribution channels, as a survival horror game. You'll note that in this talk I've referred to it as a horror adventure because that's what it is. It doesn't contain any kind of real survival elements, but because it was marketed as such, this affected the kind of the frame of discussion that players were talking about the game in afterwards. So rather than focusing on kind of discussing the game's adventure elements, or indeed its horror elements, to kind of a greater degree, players that were particularly affected by their existing transludic knowledge of what they thought survival horror meant that when they came to talk about that game afterwards, much of the focus of that subset of players was about the lack of survival elements. So even when we've got control over player expectation to an extent, and in the case of the trailers we were trying to disrupt that expectation in kind of a meaningfully nice way, the power that expectation has on that entire process kind of overrides a lot of the stuff that's experienced in the game that's played, and comes back to kind of bite the developers in the kind of games reported. So yes, I'm aware that I've kind of whizzed through some of that a little bit quickly. I'm sure there's going to be a few questions. I'm happy to fill in any gaps. Anyone has got any questions? into silence.
Hi, thanks for the paper first of all. I always enjoy papers about how gamers are angry, because they're an angry bunch. And my question was actually kind of raised that in terms of disruption. When anything was like, can you define disruption? Because at the same time, like, at which level of disruption do you think that an expectation would be disrupted enough that they'd be angry about it? Like, on one hand, for example, Yasamero, just talking about Super Mario, said that entire loop, 4 levels, that's how he discussed that he would build a level, where he would build knowledge, disrupted by adding a previously done mechanic, and then reinforce it and keep doing it over and over. But that doesn't make Super Mario players angry normally.
Indeed. Part of this, like, very early stage of the research was drawing on, I think Ollie mentioned it yesterday, actually, abusive game design. Kind of whether it was basically an abusive game design where we're breaking the rules in order to kind of specifically antagonize the player into that kind of dialogue between designer and player rather than game and player. And what I wanted to do with disruptive design was see if we could do that in a way that was a bit more commercially viable in a larger scale. So at a mechanical level, yes, I don't think you can set up really, really obvious expectations and then break them in kind of just kind of arbitrary ways, because that is just going to annoy players. The example of expectation that I didn't mention there was interludic expectation. So in the kind of player discussion, there was a very clear kind of polarized split in players that were talking about their expectations of what multiple players refer to as the amnesia experience, which in itself is interesting because that is based on just a single game. And players that focused more on the title, Amnesia, were more annoyed that it didn't match up with The Dark Descent in terms of gameplay. But the players that were more focused on the fact that it was a horror game rather than an amnesia horror game were much more able to adapt their expectations during play and after play, and they were much more of the opinion that breaking expectations in that respect was a nice surprise and refreshing, rather than kind of a reason to send bomb threats to the office. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
My question is pretty straightforward, but maybe I didn't get it. Why did you find this very interesting framework about interludic, transludic, and extraludic knowledge? Is it something you construct from
yes. I mean, this was that was one of the main parts of my PhD. Originally, it was just interludic and transludic and extraludic, but the fact that players were very specifically separating amnesia-related knowledge from other horror knowledge kind of suggested that interludic was a separate component in there. So, for example, with that lantern mechanic, players were talking about the Dark Descent. A lot of other players separately were talking about lanterns in a completely different game. So there was one player that was bemoaning the fact that the lantern reminded him far too much of the flashlight in Fear, which we apologise profusely for. But I'm not entirely sure what his particular problem was, because he didn't go into massive detail on the forum. But there was a definite split between those two specific types. But yeah, it's something that was constructed specifically for this.
Yeah, thank you. A note and a question.
Yeah.
A note just that your distinction between inter and trans also reminds me very much of the intermediality or intermediality framework by Nalaevsky. So that is also like a nice connecting point.
Thank you. Yeah.
But my question would just be, I really liked how you described that approach to changing the function of the light and messing with the player in that respect. And it just reminded me to my the ending of the first Assassin's Creed, where they try to do the same thing in a AAA environment, right? You learn all those stealth mechanics all throughout the game, and the end game is basically open fighting in broad daylight. And I was just wondering, do you have any scientific evidence or gut feeling how far you can take it? Is that a genre-dependent thing? Can you do something like that in a smaller game as opposed to a bigger game? Can you do it only to certain degrees? What do you think? How much can you mess?
Absolutely. This is kind of got a slide. Check it out. So one of the things. Obviously, this is only a case study of machine for pigs. And what I would definitely like to do is see how you can apply that to different genres. And with the horror genre, we have a lot more license to screw with the player, basically, because you can get away with it diegetically. I would be very interested to see how that would work in other genres. That is definitely one of the things I'd like to pursue. I think with larger kind of AAA games, the role of expectation might be a little bit more risky to deal with, as we have seen with things like No Man's Sky. So I think it's definitely at the minute a safer thing to do in the independent or the non-AAA space, definitely. I haven't got any scientific backing for kind of a limit to how much disruption is too much disruption. There definitely is one. I'm not sure it's something that you could kind of objectively measure, but that's something that would, in this particular case, be the thing that you can pick up in playtesting. Like, you need to, we've got a kind of 50-50 split. You can see it in the reviews. Half the player base that loved the fact that it kind of messed with things, and half that were massively angry about it. And if you're going to do something mildly experimental or more experimental, I think that's just something that needs to be accepted. But yes, kind of continuing looking at other types of disruption is definitely something I'd be interested in doing. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I do think I do agree. It would be really interesting to see how it works in different genres, because it strikes me that, as you said, horror almost you have a certain license to play with the player, and of course something like this. It also reminds me of the rule of three in comedy, precisely sort of the reinforce and then overturn. And in something like comedy, it's authorized. It's an authorized joke structure. So I do think there are kind of this kind of tactic might perhaps be more of a challenge in, I can't think of a particular genre, but might be less or more authorized according to the genre context.
Yeah, I think that's where it sits very close to abusive game design. So things like I Want to Be the Guy and Kaiser Mario and things like that, where the point of breaking the rules is directly to antagonize. Which is fine, that's a perfectly interesting way of doing things, but you generally obviously don't want to antagonize your kind of AAA market. That's probably a bad idea. Yeah, that's an interesting comparison to comedy. I hadn't thought of that before. That's nice. But yes, definitely there are going to be genres where this works better or worse, and horror is kind of a nice entry point, which is kind of nice that it was able to be linked to Machine for Pigs, because it is a nice testing ground. But yeah, I think you will definitely find that there are ways to constrain it in more meaningful ways, and probably find that limit of how much disruption is too much disruption by applying it to less kind of accepting genres, if you like.
We have time for just one more question.
Hi, yeah, thank you for that. I suppose rather than a question, kind of an invitation to expand in a slightly different direction, which is you've done a great job of covering the how. Right? How do we go about disrupting the technology, and what are the design choices we can take in order to do that. I suppose I'd like to speak a bit about the why.
Yeah.
In the sense of like what categories of experience or aesthetic effect does this open on to?
Yeah, so the kind of the why initially stemmed from what Doug Wilson was talking about in relation to abusive design, which was a kind of inherent conservatism in the AAA design, well, not in the AAA design space, in the design space generally. And I didn't think that it was fair to label the entirety of game design as conservative, because it obviously isn't. But in terms of AAA, there is a risk aversion, a very sensible risk aversion, because there's money attached. But in terms of that kind of process of teaching players through incremental accretion, there's nothing wrong with that design approach, but it certainly isn't the only design approach, and it's not necessarily even the best design approach. It's just the one that's kind of been codified as best practice through the process of kind of design anecdote and kind of design theory. And so the point of this really was initially just to explore new design spaces that hadn't got something placed in them already. And kind of through that research, through design process, basically in this particular case, the initial case study, just kind of sticking a flag in the ground of disruptive design and saying, this is a way that you can design games. It might be interesting to build a kind of ecosystem of games that use these ideas in different ways. And there is absolutely no reason, I mean, because this was the initial case study, there was a lot of kind of disruptive elements to it, but there's no reason that you couldn't pick and choose very specific components of different ways of disrupting or specific different types of knowledge to disrupt, and just plugging them into games in different spaces and different places to increase the degree of kind of cognitive engagement at very particular points, or indeed to change the focus of the game challenge at very specific points. So the intention was to provide kind of another design tool, really, that could be applied either primarily to a design or alongside other design tools as well.
Thank you.
And now we'll welcome all the names talked about stones, lights, eggs, alchemies.